Hi, everyone. Welcome back. And you are listening to the weWFM podcast. My name is Andre, and I will be your host for today. Joining me today, a very old friend, Marie Diks, VP of Client Success at S&P Data Digital. She's a senior leader that will share a journey that actually started with workforce management and how important WFM was in shaping the way Marie operates today. We'll also speak about culture and how influential culture is in your ability to get things done. Okay, Marie, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to finally speak with you again. It's been like almost 8 years since the last time we spoke, so it's always good to reconnect with an old friend. Um, to start us off, I would love to for you to introduce yourself. Just give us like an overview of what you are doing. I mean, you have been working in this industry, like you said before, shy of 20 years, so it's been a long journey. Tell us a bit of who you are and what you have been doing.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure, first of all, to be able to talk to you again. I feel sad that it's been 8 years. It doesn't feel like it though. Um, but really, honestly, as you said, my name is Marie Dix. I'm currently the Vice President of Client Success at S&P Data Digital. It is a North American company that services multiple different industries, anything from technical support to even government support, health support, even during COVID. I own the client success portion of the business, which is all of our client relationships. I have a team of directors that are an amazing group of people that work closely one on one with a set of clients, but we're also focused on growth and really looking at opportunities within our current businesses that we can grow both our clients' revenue base as well as ours. So it's a super exciting job. I've been with S&P for just shy of 4 years. And I started out as a director of client success, went into an AVP role with operations, totally left client success and went into ops, and then came back into client success as VP. So they've really kind of fostered me in, took a hold, and have been leading my career in this trajectory, which I'm really happy about. I'm super happy where I am.
Yeah, I mean, that change between ops and client manager. It's always fun because you are in the end you are trying to do the same job, the same goal, but it's a total different conversation between the two sides.
100%. I think that, and one thing I think I remember even talking to you about this back in the day when we worked together. Um, my career started actually like besides being on the phones, like besides talking to the frontline customer, my first off the phone job was in WFM
Mhm.
and I was a RTA. And I remember dreaming it and feeling there couldn't be more stress than what I'm feeling right now, managing service levels and occupancy and trying to find that balance. It's crazy how that's changed, but I don't forget a minute of it. I don't forget a single second of thinking about it like a video game. Okay, so I need to hit on this client an 80% service level within 30 seconds, but I need to maintain an 80% occupancy. And I have to do this by and skill switches and all that stuff. Like it was crazy to make that all make sense and execute on that. And now to think about that and the days that that used to make me stressed out, I think it helps me do my job today.
It makes things much easier. You have to
Of
deal with
course.
the stress of trying to managing it. So speaking about it, it's much easier, right?
Yes. And it's all different. It's been really cool because one of the things that I've noticed is that when you've had your hands in each piece of the organization, it's almost like you can speak their language. So, for example, if I talk
Mhm.
today to my counterpart in WFM, And he's talking about what's driving KPIs are, what he needs to focus on, what's the most important thing.
Mhm.
I can try to make sense into how that fits into the things that I need them to support us through, right? So I don't know if if I didn't have that experience, if I would just probably it would probably adjust my perspective, and I would think, well, he's just looking at himself. He's not thinking of my perspective. But
Mhm.
I've sat in those shoes. I remember what it was like. I understand what's driving the decisions he's making. There's got to be somewhere for us to meet in the middle.
Yeah, it gives a totally different perspective. And in a
Yeah.
nutshell, you just kind of like you are a success story of someone that started the career within this WFM scope and industry. So, which is amazing to see how someone can evolve from there. Just to touch a bit on that, and because one, you started there, two, you worked with loads of different teams within the space. So, if you had to kind of like describe like what is the best that workforce management can do for you in your current job or in your on the operations perspective, how would you kind of summarize that?
Well, that's a great question, challenging question, because I mean, ultimately, it is in understanding both the revenue and efficiency needs from the client, so internal and external stakeholder sides, right? I find that with the way that it works best, the best partnerships I've ever built between WFM and ops, when I was in ops or in client success, being in client success, has always been that they know what success looks like on paper. If my workforce team knows what success looks like, they can help me get there. So if they understand what drives revenue, what drives efficiencies from an agent level, what matters most, right? Because what matters for this client might be average handle time. But what matters for this one might be the fact that we have three concurrent chats happening at the same time. And what matters for this guy is that I hit a bill to pay of a certain percentage. And if the team that I'm working with understands the priorities and the drives of the internal and external stakeholders in that piece of business, I can set them up for success.
Kind of like the
And
extension of your own eyes within the operation, right?
exactly, that's the only way that it works, right? Because somebody needs to know that they can, ring when, and that they can ring the alarm when they need to, right? If we are running into a dangerous scenario, and building that partnership and making sure that that team understands, the efficiencies that need to be managed and how we can work together to make that happen. I think that's really what that looks like from a WFM, what's
Mhm.
key and most important. And I've always been open to, also especially in client success, to bring WFM to the table whenever we talk to the client. Not that they can reach out to them individually and bog down their workload, but more so that they understand who's in their corner, so the client gets an opportunity to express, this is what's really important to me, maybe this skilling. Do we have the capabilities? For example, I've one client I'm working with now, they're really trying to look at skilling based on performance, right? So they want to know what does that look like? How will that impact how volume is dispersed among the contact center, or the different queues within the contact center? How does that look? And only with workforce partnering with us on that and being part of the conversation would they really actually understand what we need to accomplish. So I hope that kind of answers your question in
Totally,
a roundabout way.
totally. Answer that you kind of triggered me a next question, which is I have to say I worked with you before, so no secrets here, and I think I totally feel what you said about getting WFM involved as part of the conversation because that helps a lot. I wanted to like ask is there any kind of like story or any experience you had where that was critical to solve any problem or to address? You mentioned kind of briefly that on the skills part. It's like, is there any story that you could share on how that was important to a project or an initiative that it was undergoing?
Yeah, there's so many examples of how that's been. And I think in the client that we worked with, you and I, when we worked together, we had significant challenges launching that, and especially with multiple different lines of business within five different, like, or four different languages, and trying to balance how we were going to do that with a very intense client relationship that would literally stand on the production floor fold their arms and stare up at the monitors in the queue.
Everything going okay?
And watching how and bringing you to the table for those dialogues saved that partnership because they needed someone else, a different voice, to understand why what they were seeing didn't make sense. So they looked at that queue and it was on fire to them. So you'd have a service line of business with crazy wait times, a service level in the single digits, versus a sales team that had low occupancy, underutilized, and I couldn't understand why if I'm looking at 25 people and 15 of them are talking furiously and 10 of them are twiddling their thumbs. What, this doesn't make any sense. Nobody has a sense of urgency. Um, the fact that I could and felt comfortable bringing you to the table to sit with them and explain, take them through the cues, and we built an action register, which I still refer to sometimes as a resource when I have workforce challenges, and I need to partner with my current team. I think that was super helpful and a great example of how partnering with WFM and bringing you to the table to explain it and understand. Because I think one big gap that a lot of people don't understand is, especially when you're dealing with these partnerships, is not everyone understands the tools that they're working with. The telephony tools, the programs that they're dealing with are how they function. So in theory, they'll say, well, everybody should be able to handle this and do this, but that's may not be how
Mhm.
the tool works. You
The
may not be able to.
integration between multiple tools
Exactly.
as they add more vendors in the mix and etc.
Exactly, right. And you're integrating contact types, you're integrating different languages to the skills. You've got a whole different spectrum complications that you're putting in there. And it's not as simple as the person who's standing back and at an executive level and just looking and seeing red and it not making sense. When they don't understand how the tool works, they're not going to understand what roadblocks we need to overcome in order to get it to that steady state and nice workflow, especially when you're in launch, right?
Yeah,
um
critical stages in the beginning.
exactly. And when you're able to bring WFM to the table and even demonstrate, like show the screen, show how the skill set is. I don't know how many times we'd sent screenshots. We demonstrated how we had the prioritization set up, um, just to give that level of confidence to a nervous and under pressure client that we're doing everything we can to service their front line as best as we
Mhm.
can in the limitations that we had.
Yeah, it's like we are trying to show that we are an extension of your own company, because in the end of the day, what we are trying to do is to help you getting successful. So
Exactly.
if
And
they
it's a
get
win-win,
confidence
right?
in,
Our
yeah.
goals are the same. It's just our paths are a
Mhm.
bit different. And I think the second biggest example had to have been how we partnered, where I am currently with S&P Data, and how Workforce partnered with our clients when the pandemic hit and we needed to deploy thousands of people to work from home, and
Scary
how we were
times.
going to monitor that. And how were we even, we went from an age of walkie-talkies on the production floor with WFM RTAs going, so and so's in wrap for this long a time, go check on them, to they're sitting in their house. How do I know what they're doing?
Yeah, this in the span of like 20 years, it's scary. Just to people that
To
were
think,
used to work at that time, looking to now, it's like, how the hell did they manage to do that?
well, and it's a crazy thought process of the things that had to roll out in a short period of time
Mhm.
to make this work. And we were able to like do some of these deployments in like record time, and like you're watching associates walk in and take the equipment, like take your, see you later, go into the elevator with my computer.
I can imagine the security guys seeing like one, it was like, hey, you cannot go. It's like then see like three, four, five. Is like, okay, maybe this is the new norm
uh
now.
Something's happening.
Something is
Yeah.
happening
and
here.
and trying to get your shared services teams, right? Like workforce management, like QA and training and all these support teams all working together in a new virtual world and still maintaining the level of security, the level of interaction, the level of monitoring, right? At base level WFM to complex, where we're talking about automated reports, where we need visibility, where we're talking about managing your shrink and your finances. Right, the revenue both from the client revenue, how much are they benefiting from our partnership, to your own revenue is how much are we able to support them.
Yeah, clear. Another, just to flip sides here, and moving slightly back on your early days as kind of a WFM RTI, just wondering, like, is there any skill that you learned? You kind of mentioned that stressful part about like being more attentive to what's happening, but is there any specific skill that you built up that you still use today?
Um, it was all about when I went into WFM and I started my career there. They had a very unique approach to the business, and at that time, WFM was accountable to KPIs, right? So if service level was missed for a specific client, the first person you asked was WFM, not operations. It was, what did you do to, like, what actions were taken?
Yeah.
The ability to be able to think on the fly and make these decisions and trust your instincts was something I had to develop, right? Because this was a new territory for me. I woke
Mhm.
up and saw the dashboard in the middle of the night and thought, "Oh my God, I'm missing
Someone that's out
something."
of adherence. I need to
Right?
fix it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that capability of having to know where to look, what indicators do I have to look that tells me what is impacting. For example, reading an intraday report and being able to ascertain what the rest of my day is going to look like, how I'm going to end, if I mathematically can even hit service level for that day, if by making a certain percentage of reduction in AHT, what virtual FTE is that going to gain me? To
Yeah.
this day, even in my current role, I still will do that math.
Yeah,
I'll
super. It's
still
super
go and
important basic math that I think everyone, even for everyone that is listening, that is even starting. I think many times now today, most of the tools kind of give you that based on the level of integration you have. But it's so important if you're able to do that sum very quickly. It's like a very basic arithmetic, but it changes completely your game because you can read things much faster and make decisions much faster. Yeah, totally agree and recognize myself on that as well.
exactly. And that's why I think it's reading and interpreting something from a report, even from, handling the impact on attendance and attrition, and being able to determine where action plans need to be placed and how to get that from a report, why it's telling me that, or what, like even volume fluctuations throughout the day would impact when to be in an AHOD, or like an all hands on deck process. These tools that I learned in the early parts of my career, like to this day, I'll still, and luckily I'm very public about the fact that I started in WFM. I love that because I think if anybody has that path and wants to get really far in their career, they have to take a stint in WFM because it's the way to understand your business from a numbers perspective. Know what it means in the
Mhm.
background, because then I'm educated for that part. Everyone knows the buzzwords on the quartile analysis, but where does that quartile evaluation come from? Who builds
Very
that for
true.
you? And where are those numbers? Right?
Yeah, everyone
And
somehow is used to get a certain level of degree on an analysis, but it's just taking and I think it's a good job that the WFM professionals do, which is you are trying to enable the decision making process. So as easy as is it to read, the better. Like for decision makers, it's like, oh, I just have to look at the numbers, see if they are good or bad, and it's done. But yeah, I agree
yeah,
with you. Totally agree.
yeah. And I think, like, even to this day, like, and it works vice versa. The director I worked with for WFM to this day spent a few years as an operations manager. And I think that makes him, it gives him an edge. It gives him an edge in his WFM background because he's very analytical, to when he works in partnership with operations and he hears certain things, he's able to ascertain and help them in his skill set to set them up for success. And I'm lucky enough to work in an environment that nobody's, like, everybody's encouraged to kind of like drive in the lane that if wherever they need. Like if I feel that I need to bring in WFM for something, and even if it might be an operational deliverable, but I need that level of support and analysis, that's not in my job description. That doesn't exist. Your knowledge, your background brings us a level of support that I need to be successful. So we make it work.
Yeah.
Um, and I do that even with my background, from even operationally in client success, from WFM, from quality to training.
It's super good to hear that from that perspective, because I think it, for everyone that is listening, I think it's how important, because again, you are here representing the number one persona of a stakeholder that WFM professionals have, and it's like so important to hear that perspective. I think it helps a lot. Just to kind of like out of curiosity, just to change more a bit on the WFM side, because I think it's important for people to know you better. So you, if I'm correct, and I might be wrong, so we met not in Canada because you are based in Canada,
I,
and you worked in Canada your entire career, like even before and after, right? Or did you have any experience outside?
so I've spent a good period of time over in offshore, so in the Philippines and in Manila,
Okay.
but that was in partnership with where I was working. So we had a shared service, and we actually had, I'd worked in one of the companies I worked with. We actually brought on a company in the Philippines and in India, and so I spent a good portion of time there to help onboard, to help launch, to help educate. And I was super lucky to be able to spend that time and learn how they do it differently, even how they offshore.
That's important, because my next question is, if I recall correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong. I believe you were someone that really liked to love to travel. I remember back in the day in the office, oh, I'm going to do like a weekend there or out there. Like anything you miss from Portugal in this specific case, because we worked there together. So is there anything you
Oh
miss?
boy, do I miss Portugal. I, to this day, still stay. Um, I don't regret that I came back to Canada. My dad got sick and subsequently passed away a few years later. So had I not come back, I would have lost a few years I got to spend with him. But I miss the multicultural facet that I worked in there, and the ease of being able to kind of go anywhere. I spend a lot of time still traveling here. Even during COVID, I ended up going to one of our partner sites, like one of our sites in the east coast of Canada in Newfoundland, and I spent a while there. I was there, and I had never even been to that part of Canada. And for anybody geographically challenged, Canada's huge. It's
Yeah.
the same flight for me to go to Portugal it is for me to go to the other part of my own country. So, and it was a completely different experience. And I still travel to the US a lot to our partner sites that are there. I absolutely adore that travel and the versatility that now this remote world brings us is crazy. Um, but it also has you stay put a bit more than I used to. I probably don't travel at the frequency that I would have in before. I used to spend, I mean, one of the places I worked with, I probably was more away than I was home.
Yeah. Your home was just to go back and change clothes
Yeah,
and repack again to fly again.
yeah, literally. And still, I mean, I just got back from one trip, but I was able to drive there, and I got to make some stops, and it's quite nice to jump into a site and everybody remembers the last time you were there and that. But it was a very unique experience. And I still to this day, and I joke around because I do brag about the time I spent in Portugal and how much I loved what I did and the people I met and how it impacted my life and how I do my job today. But also I still show like our Christmas party videos or like the summer party videos and like
It's
this
good.
is a whole different culture. It was a whole different experience. But I used to pride, and I still do pride myself on the fact that in my career, I not only was able to spend time in almost every department, with the exception of finance. Boring. But with the exception of finance, in every training, quality, ops, WFM, I used to joke around that I would moonlight as IT, and whenever I I attempted to fix anything, um, but I was able to also have a nearshore, onshore, offshore experience. So when I went to Portugal, that was my very first European contact center experience. I had done the offshore, the Philippines and India. component and spent like months, 6 months at a time in centers out there. And I'd done North America where we did, and even a small stint in South America, but I'd never done Europe until I'd gone to Portugal and had that experience. And it was, there were differences, 1,000% on how
Yeah.
even the work ethic and how everyone worked together.
I was going to ask about that because like you literally have all the corners of the world. You have like a sneak peek of experience. Like, is there any massive difference culturally that you see? Like, for instance, like you were mentioning on the work ethic, but is there anything like you feel like that you could share as an example of how different things are between these locations?
I remember it's actually in Portugal, and I remember being brought in by Shervin, and he came into my office and he's like, "Can I talk to you about something?" And I said, "Sure." He says, "You're intense. You are hyper and loud, and sometimes you're stressing people out." So, what I did notice is that the expectation I find in North America is that a sense of urgency is visible, tangible. You can
Yeah,
see it and you
you
can
can
feel it.
feel
And
it.
if,
Yeah,
yeah, and if you remember, like there's a buzz on the floor. And our client that we were working with at that time, every time he had my one on one with me, he's like, "I don't feel the sense of urgency on your floor." Right. And but it was cultural. It was
yeah,
very cultural. They didn't need to. They were successful in being the way that they were. But it was very hard for them to take this loud Canadian girl going on the floor, like clapping their hands and screaming, like, "Come on, everybody." And they're like, "Why is she so loud?
what's going on? It's like,
Why
but
is
I
she
think
so hyper? Is something on fire?"
I think that's one of the things I kind of enjoyed. It's like that level of energy. It kind of helps a lot to, even when the days are not going necessarily that good. It helps a lot to kind of like, okay, refocus. Like there, like it's always like a laugh or a smile to have in the end of the day. I think that for me personally was very important. So
But I
uh,
think what that taught me a lot in my career was that that's not the only way to tell that something is good, is
yeah,
somebody is paying attention, is by that, right? So it made me step back and say, hold on a second. Just because they're not at the same like energy or walking at the same pace that I'm walking and not, doing that, doesn't mean that it's not as important as it is to me.
yeah,
And it really kind of humbled me to that fact, to pay attention to, how everyone handles everything a little bit different. And there are always a cultural component to that, right? You have those conversations where people talk about the differences between North America and Europe. And most people will say, in Europe, you work to live. In North America, you live to work, right? And you see that. I felt it in, like, before coming to Portugal. I spent, besides my career and time in Canada, I spent 5 years in Mallorca living there, in Spain, where they close shops in the middle of the day to have a nap for your siesta. I
even
have no
even for
idea
me
what
it's
they're
weird,
doing,
but and I'm Portuguese,
right?
I'm a neighbor, but yeah, I get your point.
and
It's
and
very cultural.
it's different and just as successful to work to live.
Yeah,
And I love that somehow in a lot of places now they're adopting that mentality, right? Portugal was one of the first places to make it a law to not be contacted outside of your hours of
yeah,
operations.
it's very
Guess what
true.
other country decided to make that a law? Right? Canada. Here we
Canada.
are. Oh, the Portuguese have a smart idea. Here we are. And I love that. I love that there some of those best practices are being shared, vice versa.
Yeah, and it helped. I think it's you shared a very interesting perspective on how cultural is important, and I think those perspectives help a lot to kind of like even to understand the context on the other side. That's definitely good to hear. And I wanted to ask, so throughout your journey, and is there anyone or any kind of like could be a person, could be kind of like something that happened that really stood with you until today, and helped kind of shape who you are?
I have so many examples of different people and experiences that impacted my life. One of the big things that, like, contact centers and this industry that we work in isn't something that most people sit there in high school and go, that's where I'm going to work,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm just going to, that's my dream, right?
Yeah.
But I've built a life and support a family around it. And I'm so proud of the things I've accomplished and what I've done and the places I've been and the things, the people I've met. I mean, look at us across an ocean here talking like this today. I wouldn't have changed it for the world. When I grew up, I wanted to be like five different things that every kid wants to be, right? Like a teacher or a doctor or a nurse or a police officer or something like that. And I get the fulfillment in my career of a lot of those things. I get to help people in some way, shape, or form every single day. If it's even by listening to someone who's having a tough day, to um, bringing on a client that's going to bring hundreds of jobs to an area that really needed an influx of job security, or even calling someone and giving them a lead on something that's huge. But I can recall, and I always bring it down to this one moment in my career at the very beginning. And I was working as a team leader, team manager at the time. I had already done my stint for 8 months in WFM. My leader at the time, he was an amazing personality. Still talk to him to this day. Probably one of my very first influential individuals in my life. Um, he actually was the one that took me out of WFM and suggested that I move into operations and said, your personality tells me that you should be in with people. But knowing that you're in operations with what you brought, what you've learned in WFM, I feel like I'd have like a somebody who understands what's important to WFM out in operations and can help us bridge the gap between WFM and ops, which you see in different organizations with different clients occur regularly. That versus WFM rather than ops with WFM.
At
And
that
he had
read, it's so important. Sorry to interrupt
right,
you, because that is probably the magical world, that word that changes a lot of the perspective. Is like, it's not we and them, it's like we are one.
us,
So if
exactly.
us get this together, we win together. So that's super important. Yeah, I
And that's
totally
what he
agree.
thought. He's like, this is the perfect thing because you'll be in there with operations and able to understand why we're doing what decisions we're making and why, and help people drive that decision on the front line. So I was and I loved to learn more and understand the whys behind it. I was very ambitious and got a taste of growth with my first jump into WFM and then becoming a backup manager there and now in operations. And we had a client that was in trouble. They were flying in, not for great news, but to have a challenging discussion. And at that time, the operations managers, they were struggling and they needed somebody to present to the client that didn't have that kind of background that the OMs had of them already having some challenging discussions. They needed a different face to present what had happened and what we were going to do to the client. So, with very little notice, my former boss went to our like on-site executive teams and said, Marie will do it. Marie will present for us. And
Sweating,
at the
right?
day before, the day before at 9 p.m., I got the final draft of the presentation that started at 8 a.m. the next day. And that moment where, I had to take in the late night and the no sleep and work and, you know, dress the part and understand how I was going to present it and be natural and get over some of the nerves and the fear and stand in front of a client and convince them to continue their relationship and have faith in our success. And it would be my words and how I presented and the confidence in which I spoke that would help them make that decision. And I had to get over any of my insecurities because more than that rode on my success that day, and that this was a career making moment.
Yeah,
And
that's
he
super
had faith
powerful.
in me without like just working alongside me in a little fishbowl office, we used to call it, and said Marie will do it. And he saw something in me that I don't think I saw. And then that's when everything kind of began.
Yeah, career defining moment.
Mhm.
Amazing to hear. Thanks for sharing. Kind of to wrap up things, I have kind of two final questions. One more on the funny side. Um, is there anything, so while we were here in Portugal, we worked together, but like we mentioned the cultural side, how different things were. Is there anything that you found super weird? Like things that were like, why do they do this in this country or Portugal or
Like,
somewhere
can
else?
it be just a Portugal thing?
It can be. You can
It's
go.
about, you know what I thought it was weird, and to this day I still talk about it. The eating these donuts on the beach. Nobody believes me when I tell them, seriously, they just sell these
They are
donuts.
not necessarily donuts. It's like
They look
it's
exactly like
kind.
a donut. We're a
Yeah,
donut country.
we
They
don't call
have
it
cream
donuts, but
inside.
yeah, I don't eat it, but it's like it's a very traditional
What's
thing.
it
You go
called
to
again?
Bollard Berlin.
Okay, so I was trying to,
It's I
so
don't know if there is even an English translation to that, but yeah,
no, because Andrea took me to the beach for the first time with her family. And then she's like, "You have to eat this. It's just tastes delicious on the beach." Now, I'll tell you, she wasn't wrong. It was delicious. For some reason, it was so great and it was awesome. Every time I went to the beach, I ate one. But to this day, I explain to people, you want to know what happens when I was in the beach in Portugal? They sell donuts. Like, have this cream-filled donut and it's delicious. And I thought, that's so weird. And you know what else I will tell you? People were shocked by a commute. So when I lived there, I lived like my first apartment when I moved there was in downtown, right
yeah,
by like Marquês de Pombal,
yeah.
right there, like right downtown.
I remember that. Yeah.
Then I moved to Sao Pedro
Hmm.
by Cascais, right? So I was very close, and everyone's like, "Oh, why'd you? It's so far." And I was like, "It's 30 minutes on a train. Like,
Yeah.
this is amazing." They're like, "Oh, it's so long." But to me, it was like that's a dream here.
Yeah.
30 minutes on a train and then you just have to walk a few seconds.
Yeah. People's
That I was
perception on commute, it's
yeah,
very weird. Yeah. I
yes.
have to
That
admit
was
that.
so different to me. Was that just seemed like why'd you go so far away? I
Yeah.
was like,
And I have to say that like being Portuguese and I know that feeling. So in one of my travels a while back, I have two stories very similar. One, I went to Brazil and in São Paulo, I wanted to go to the airport and my plane was at like 4 p.m., something like that. And it was like 10 a.m. So I was like, plenty of time. It's like without traffic, it's like a 35-minute drive, 1 hour maximum tops. And I was like, it started to rain. And guys were like, oh, you have to go. It's like, I have to go. Why? It's like, with rain, traffic in Sao Paulo is not easy. It's worse than in LA. And I was like, okay, I mean, I will trust. I don't know. I arrived 25 minutes before the plane departure. It was like crazy, 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 crazy traffic with rain. So that one was my
wow.
one of the worst experience in traffic I had, but I
That'd be
totally
so
understand that.
terrifying.
Imagine the commute there. It's like, oh, it's raining. So today is plus 4 hours.
That's nuts. I mean, when I got the offer to for the job in Portugal, I watched one YouTube video that said the 10 best things and no, 5 best things and 5 worst things about living in Lisbon. They were right about both things. And one of them was how people drive. Like, I would joke that if I wasn't taking the train, I'd be like, oh, I'm taking the Formula One home.
Formula One.
Yep, I take the Formula One. Just,
I think we
just
got used to
head
that.
down.
Yeah, we got used to that. To be honest, with one. Marie, to end, is there any question to myself? Anything you want to share before we close?
Um, I loved having this conversation with you. So thank you so much. It's I think you can tell by how excited and hyper I get that I love what I do. And and
Yeah,
um and I'm very proud of the career path I took as well as, you know, how where I've landed and where I am now. But most of all, I just appreciate that we've even at a very high level stayed connected, and thank you so much for thinking of me for this and having this dialogue. You know, I hope you got out of it what you really were hoping for, and
for me, it
would
was a
love to come
pleasure.
back anytime.
It was a pleasure to have you. I mean, like I said, it's we need to avoid getting like another 8 years on top of this one.
Yes, please.
Please, because I think it's like you said, your story is for me. It's like it brings a different perspective from someone that started in the WFM as a stakeholder. You know exactly what to expect. You will also understand the other side and how important is the two sides combining together efforts. So it was perfect, I think, for us, and I really hope that the audience could connect with you at the same level. So Marie, thank you really so much for your time, and let's stay in touch, I think. And
Yes,
for the
please.
audience, please follow us for more episodes. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to weWFM. This podcast is made and produced by André Leitão, Bilge Hantolun, Doug Carsteton, Gonçalo Gomes, and Kim Paz. If you like this show, don't forget to share it with your friends and colleagues. Visit our website weWFM.com to find more exclusive interviews and WFM content. See you next time. All rights reserved.